The envelope was yellowed at the edges. The kind of yellow that only comes from decades in a drawer, forgotten but never thrown away. The handwriting on the front was careful. Deliberate. The kind of handwriting someone uses when they want to make sure every word is legible. When they want to make sure the person receiving it can read every single letter without difficulty. The address was real. The stamp was real. The intention behind it was real, but the letter never arrived. And 20 years later, in a television studio in Los Angeles, Dr. Phil McGraw held it in both hands and went completely, utterly still. Not the practiced stillness of a professional managing a difficult moment. The involuntary stillness of a man who has just learned something that has stopped him from the inside out. His eyes didn't move. His hands didn't move. For 4 full seconds, one of the most experienced television hosts in American history forgot he was on television. That was the moment. But to understand why it mattered, you have to go back to the beginning. Margaret was 48 years old when she walked onto the Dr. Phil stage. She'd driven 11 hours to get there. Hadn't told her daughter where she was going. Had packed a single bag, left a note on the kitchen counter saying she'd be back by Thursday, and driven through the night with the envelope sitting on the passenger seat beside her. Not in her bag. On the seat. Where she could see it. She'd carried it for 20 years. Not always physically, but always mentally. The weight of it had become so familiar that she sometimes forgot it was there, the way you forget about a scar until someone asks about it. And then it's all you can feel. She looked tired when she sat down. Not the tired of someone who hadn't slept. The tired of someone who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally decided to set it down, regardless of what that meant. Dr. Phil greeted her the way he always did. Direct but warm. He'd read her file. Knew the broad strokes. But the details, the real details, were still to come. "Margaret," he said, settling into his chair, "you wrote to us 3 months ago. And in your letter you said there was something you'd been holding on to that was destroying your relationship with your daughter. Something that started 20 years ago. Tell me where it began." Margaret folded her hands in her lap. Looked at them for a moment. Then looked up. "It began with a letter," she said. "A letter my mother wrote." The studio was quiet. Attentive but not yet alarmed. Just the normal attentiveness of an audience waiting for a story to unfold. "My mother died 22 years ago," Margaret continued. "She was 63. Heart attack. Very sudden. No warning. One day she was there, and the next day she wasn't." She paused. "She and I had a complicated relationship. That's the polite way to say it. We argued a lot. About everything. About the way I was raising my daughter. About my choices. About her choices. We could be in the same room for about 40 minutes before something ignited." Dr. Phil nodded. Didn't interrupt. Let her find her own pace. But she loved my daughter. My daughter Claire. She loved her completely and without complication, the way she and I could never love each other. Claire was 7 when my mother died. And she was devastated. Because to Claire, my mother was just warmth. Pure warmth. The arguments that defined our relationship meant nothing to Claire. She just knew her grandmother as someone who read to her and made her feel special. Margaret reached into her bag. Slowly. Like she was reaching for something fragile. She pulled out the envelope. Yellowed. Worn at the edges. She held it in her lap but didn't open it. Just looked at it. 2 months after my mother died, I was cleaning out her house. Going through her things. And I found this in her desk drawer. It was sealed. Stamped. Addressed to Claire. Margaret's voice remained steady but only just. She'd written my daughter a letter. Before she died. I don't know when. I don't know if she knew something was wrong with her heart, or if it was just something she'd been meaning to send. But she'd written it. Sealed it. Stamped it. And never mailed it. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. Margaret, Dr. Phil said carefully. You found this letter 20 years ago. Yes. And you're holding it right now. Yes. Which means... He stopped. Let the implication sit. Which means Claire never received it. Margaret said. Claire is 27 years old. And she has never read her grandmother's last letter. Because I found it. And I kept it. The audience shifted. A murmur moved through the room. Not hostile. Confused. Trying to understand. Why? Dr. Phil asked. Just that. No judgment in the word. Just a question. Margaret looked at him. Her eyes were wet now, but she wasn't crying yet. Because I read it first. I opened it before I knew what it was. Before I saw that it was addressed to Claire. I just saw my mother's handwriting on an envelope and I opened it. She stopped. And what she wrote to Claire, it was everything she never said to me. Every gentle thing. Every proud thing. Every I love you that she never managed to say to my face. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. She wrote to Claire the way I always needed her to write to me. And I couldn't give it to Claire. Because reading it felt like proof that my mother knew how to love that way. She just chose not to love me that way. The studio was absolutely still. The kind of still that only happens when an entire room of people is holding its breath. Dr. Phil set down his cards. Not dramatically. Just quietly, deliberately, the way you set something down when you need both hands free to handle what's coming. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He leaned forward. Elbows on knees. The posture that meant he was no longer in host mode. He was just a person, sitting across from another person, in a room full of witnesses. Margaret, he said. I want you to really hear what I'm about to say. Not as a guest on a television show. As a human being who has been carrying something unbearable for 20 years. He paused. You didn't steal that letter because you're cruel. You kept it because reading it broke something in you. Because it showed you a version of your mother that you deserved and never received. And giving it to Claire felt like giving away the only proof you had that your mother was capable of the tenderness you always needed from her. Margaret's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together hard. Nodded once. But here's what I also need you to hear. Dr. Phil continued. Claire has been grieving a grandmother she barely got to know for 20 years. And somewhere in that grief is a letter addressed specifically to her. Written by the one person who loved her without complication. And you've been the wall between them. The silence in the studio was profound. I know, Margaret whispered. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Is Claire here today? Dr. Phil asked. Margaret looked up. Something shifted in her expression. Fear and relief arriving at exactly the same moment. Yes, she said. She's backstage. She doesn't know about the letter. She thinks we're here to talk about our relationship. About the distance between us. Dr. Phil looked toward the production area. Made a quiet gesture. Then turned back to Margaret. Before we bring her out, I want to ask you something. 20 years is a long time to carry this. What made you decide to come forward now? Margaret looked down at the envelope in her hands. Because Claire is pregnant, she said quietly. She's having a daughter. And when she told me, all I could think about was, what if my mother had kept something from me? What if there was something I was supposed to have and someone decided I didn't deserve it? She shook her head slowly. I don't want to be the reason my granddaughter grows up not knowing her mother fully. I don't want what I did to echo forward. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. The backstage door opened. Claire walked out. Late 20s. Dark hair. Visibly pregnant. She looked at her mother with the careful expression of someone who loved the person they didn't entirely trust. The complicated love of a daughter who had spent years trying to close a distance she didn't fully understand. She sat down. Looked at Dr. Phil. Then at her mother. Then at the envelope. "What is that?" she asked. Margaret held it out. Her hand was shaking. "This is from your grandmother," she said. "She wrote it before she died. I found it when I was clearing out her house. And I should have given it to you 20 years ago. I'm sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry." Claire took the envelope. Stared at it. Turned it over. Saw her name in her grandmother's handwriting. Her face went through 5 different things in the space of 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, grief, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "She wrote to me?" Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "She wrote to you," Margaret confirmed. Claire looked up at her mother. "Why didn't you give it to me?" "Because I was hurt. And selfish. And I was wrong." Margaret's voice was steady now. Like saying it out loud had used up all the trembling. "I was wrong, Claire. I've been wrong for 20 years." The studio was so quiet that you could hear the subtle hum of the stage lights. Doctor Phil watched. Didn't speak. This wasn't his moment. This belonged to the 2 women sitting across from each other with 20 years of silence and a yellowed envelope between them. Claire looked down at the letter in her hands. She didn't open it. "Not yet." "Can I read it later?" she asked. "Alone?" "Yes," Margaret said immediately. "Of course." "Okay." Claire held the envelope against her chest. Pressed it there. "The way you hold something you've been waiting for without knowing you." Dr. Phil gave them another moment. Then spoke quietly. "Margaret, what you did today took tremendous courage. Not because it was the right thing to do, it was. But because it cost you something. It cost you the private grief you'd been holding. The proof you'd been keeping. And you gave it away anyway. That's not a small thing." He looked at Claire. "And Claire, whatever is in that letter, whatever your grandmother wrote to you, you deserve to receive it. You always did. And the fact that it's in your hands now, even 20 years late, matters. Because she wrote it. She meant it. Time doesn't change that." Claire nodded. Her eyes were full, but she wasn't crying yet. Saving it. Saving it for later, when she was alone with her grandmother's words. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Margaret reached out slowly. Touched her daughter's hand. Claire looked down at their hands. Then up at her mother. And in that moment, not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet and human and real, something shifted. Not fixed. Not resolved. But shifted. The first millimeter of movement after 20 years of stillness. Dr. Phil turned to camera. "If you're holding something back from someone who needs it, a truth, an apology, a letter, a conversation, ask yourself what you're protecting. Because sometimes what we tell ourselves is protection is actually just fear. And fear has an expiration date. It runs out. And then you're left with the question, what did I cost someone else by holding on?" Margaret kept the envelope. Claire took it home. She read it alone, the way she'd asked. What it said has never been made public. What Margaret knows is that after Claire read it, she called her. Not to forgive her, not yet. But to talk. For the first time in years they talked. The letters sat on Claire's nightstand through the final months of her pregnancy. When her daughter was born, she named her after her grandmother. Not as a gesture of complete reconciliation, but as an acknowledgement, this woman existed. She loved me. And even across 20 years of silence, her words found their way home. The baby slept in a crib by the window. Claire sat beside her in the dark, the letter in her lap. She'd read it dozens of times by now. The words never changed. But what they meant kept deepening. Her grandmother had written about small things. The way Claire laughed, the way she asked questions that were too big for a 7-year-old, the way she made everyone in a room feel like the most important person there. She'd written, "You are going to be someone who makes the world softer. Don't ever let anyone harden you." Claire looked at her sleeping daughter. At the name on the birth certificate. At the letter in her hands. Some things arrive late. That doesn't make them less true. And some people love us completely, we just don't always receive the proof in time.